Hello everyone, thanks for joining. If you are here, I can see there's a few people here already. We're going to have a bit of chat tonight about my new book, Teaching Rebooted, and hopefully get inside the book, talk about some of the main topics, but also pull back a little bit of the cover on why research has been so difficult to get into our classrooms over the last few decades, really. How, as a teacher or a senior leader, or however you are watching this night, how you can kind of get involved, how you can really hopefully transform your own teaching and help, if you're a senior leader, transform the teaching and learning in your whole school by using more of an evidence approach to to your teaching and to really the quality of education that's going on in your school. So, like I said, my new book, Teaching Rebooted, came out just this Thursday, and really, I want to talk to you about it. If you haven't got it already, then I'm going to be giving a discount code a couple of times throughout this evening, and you'll be able to get it for 25% off if you go to bloomsbury.com, and I'll share that code with you. And I'm sure the team at Bloomsbury, who are working behind the scenes on this, will share it in the comments as well. So you can get that 25% off, and hopefully you'll really like it. So I wanted to start by talking about why I wrote the book, really, and it was really a real frustration for me. And interestingly, I was on a podcast this week talking to Darren Leslie on the Becoming Educated podcast. And I was talking to him about my frustrations, really, of being a teacher and being a senior leader, and not really knowing as much about the science of learning that I should have known about. And it was interesting because I came through the graduate teacher program into education, and I thought that maybe I had missed out on lots of the theory and the real pedagogy behind the science of learning. And I've been learning more about it over the last 2 or 3 years, but I thought, well, maybe somehow my route into teaching had missed this, and I'd kind of navigated around this, and it was really quite, I suppose, embarrassing for a period of time, because I was reading things and learning things and thinking, I should have known this, and hadn't really wanted to, I suppose, expose myself to other people by saying, I have no idea about this, I wasn't sure about it. And then as I started growing in more confidence and talking about retrieval practice and what spacing is and what interleaving is, and dual coding and cognitive load and all these types of things, I found that all the people I was talking to felt exactly the same. And it wasn't just that I'd missed it in my route into teaching, everyone had missed it. And that was what really prompted me to write the book. And in the first chapter of the book, I really go into detail and talk about why this research on the science of learning hasn't made it into our classrooms as much as it should have. And there are lots of reasons behind that. And one of the things that I think is one of the main problems is that it's really inaccessible. And generally it's written by academics. And so it's therefore, it's the language is quite really high order. It's the length of it, some of it's 200, 300, 400 pages. And we don't know where to find it. So this has been a real issue for us as educators, that this real core knowledge and the foundation of knowledge that we've needed to really make sure our teaching, our lessons, and our schools have a real foundation of really what works. Now, I'll come back to that term, what works, as we move along tonight in the discussion. And we haven't been able to to access it for all those reasons. So I really wanted to write the book so that it was accessible for everyone, from a trainee teacher all the way up to a senior leader, a head teacher, and CEOs really of multi-academy trusts, because we need to make sure that we can really get the research very succinct, we can understand it quickly, and we can then put it into practice in our classrooms the very next day. And that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to look at all of the main areas that I feel are really important in the science of learning, and I've tried to really distill it down to 3 or 4 sections within each chapter, and then really give you some really practical ideas. So there's 10 different chapters. It covers everything from retrieval practice, spacing, interleaving, questioning, assessment, cognitive load, feedback, dual coding, metacognition. And the way I've decided to split the chapters up is the first part of each chapter is Teacher 1.0. And the reason I've called it that is it's not a slight on anybody, and it's not this is bad teaching, or this is ultimately everything I've done as a teacher, everything I was taught to do as a teacher, and probably everything that I've actually sat there as a senior leader and told other people to do previously in years gone by. So this is what we, I suppose, all thought was the way to teach. So every chapter starts with a Teacher 1.0, and really I want to get people to reflect on what they're doing as teachers, how they're doing it, and really looking in the mirror and thinking, yeah, I've done that before. I was told to do that, or I still do that. And then I then go into what the research actually says. So I take 2 bits of research per theme, per chapter, and really distill it down to 5, 6, 7, or 800 words. What are the main key, the key areas? What does it really mean? What does it say? And what are the key sound bites? I think that's really important to be able to kind of to take those sound bites with you, to be able to then share those sound bites with other people of your staff in your school, and to be able to then really remember those things rather than like I said, 200 or 300 page report. Let's get down to to what do I really need to know? What do I need to know? What do I need to put into practice in my school? So we distill that down, and then I talk about Teacher 2.0, and this is where I think hopefully I'm trying to make sure everyone can really transition to within this, and kind of reading that Teacher 1.0, looking at it, looking in the mirror and thinking, I do those things, I've done those things before. What does the research now say? Right, okay, maybe I'm doing things that are at odds with the research and that aren't really in line with the research, so I maybe need to then think about how I can do this differently. And then Teacher 2.0 gives you 4 different practical ways per chapter on how you can implement what the research is saying. And so over the book, there's 40 different ways and 40 different practical ideas for you to be able to implement this and really get it into practice the very next day. And that's what it's about. It's not about having to read this book from start to finish. It's not a novel. It's something you can dip in and dip out. You can take 1 chapter at a time. You can pick a chapter that you feel that you need to learn more about. You can, drop it, put it back, come and grab it in 2 weeks' time, go back to it, have it on your desk at school, have it on your desk at work, whatever it is. You can literally, go into it, consume it really quickly. What do I need to know? What am I doing that's maybe at odds with the research, and how can I do it better in my classroom? Because that's what we want to know. How can I actually put it into practice the next day? Lots of the books that I've read recently talk about the science of learning. They talk about it for umpteen kind of paragraphs and chapters, but actually lots of them don't really tell you, so what do I need to do, and how can I put it into practice? And that's what I was really keen to do, to make sure it was really accessible, because there are things in this book. This is the book that I suppose, in a nutshell, I wanted to read and I needed to read when I started teaching. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to really make sure that I was writing the book for me 20 years ago, for the trainee teachers coming through now, because I've spent, lots and lots of my time the last 5 or 6 years in charge of professional development. And I've spent lots of my time retraining staff on these methods and trying to break bad habits. And that really frustrates me, because what we need to be doing is really engaging and educating people at the point of entry into the profession. Let's catch them when they're trainee teachers, when they're NQTs, and let's get those real habits that have a foundation of evidence of what works, not what we think works, not what we've just read on Twitter, or we think that we'll just give it a go. What actually works, and let's make sure teachers know that right from the point of entry to the profession. Now, interestingly, lots of people speak to me and say, yes, but John, research isn't everything, and that we can't just be completely research-led, because sometimes it doesn't work, and that's absolutely right. It's really important to make sure that we understand what research says and we add it into our thought process. And what I mean by that is that we have our gut feelings. We know certain things work that work for you might not work for somebody else, and somebody's given you something to work that they've told you work, and it doesn't work for whatever reason, and we know that. So we can't be a robotic profession that just takes something off the shelf and we plug it into our classroom and we expect it to work, because we know it's not that easy. If it was that easy, you'd read something like this and that'd be it. You're done. You're a perfect teacher. You don't need to learn anymore. We know it's not that simple. And I think I talk about in the book the profession needing to be a bit more like the medical profession, and having more of a medical approach to our use of research. And the reason I say that is because I think all of us, if we took our own children to a doctor, we'd be all horrified if the doctor decided to just sit in front of you and say, oh, well, I'm going to try this medicine on you. I'm going to try it out. Not really sure if it's going to work, but I saw someone talking about it on the internet last night, so I'm just going to give it a go and see if it works. I think we'd all be horrified that there wasn't more of a foundational approach to some kind of what works, and some research behind the medicine. It's been tested, it's been trialed, it's worked, and then it's been kind of almost passed off that you can use this. But that's what we do in our classrooms every day. We think about things like this. We see things, we try it on kids. Sometimes they work, sometimes it doesn't. And I really think certainly now with us going back to school, or hopefully going back to school in 2 weeks' time, certainly here in the UK, post-COVID or in the middle, I suppose, of COVID still, we really need to make sure that what we are using in our approaches have been trialed, have been tested, and they do work. So going back to the idea of not just being robotic, what then the research needs to do is add to our decision making. We've got our gut says, we've got what we know our context of our school, we know what might work with our kids and what doesn't work, what your facilities you've got, and all the other things that are happening. But then that research is also, it can help you make the best decisions. And actually, well, if I'm pretty sure it works, or I've given it a go, the research says it's pretty strong evidence to say that it might work, right, great, I'll give that a go. So it just adds to your decision making to make sure we make really sound decisions, rather than just decisions based on a whim, based on a gut feeling, with no evidence at all attached to it. And I think when we start to break that down and think about things like that, then it really gives us, I suppose, a line in the sand moment of saying, I really do. I think I need to understand more evidence. I need to understand what works really in classrooms, not just what I think works, but actually I've got a duty to the families that I am serving, either as a school leader or as a teacher, to make sure that we are giving the students the very best opportunity that they can, because they only get one chance at this at school. Well, let's make sure that that we're giving them the best opportunity possible. So that's kind of why I wrote the book, and that's why I think that we really need to really kind of get on board with this. I want to dive in now to 3 or 4 different sections of the book and really pull apart certainly one myth to start with, and that's spacing and interleaving. And I've written 2 separate chapters, one on spacing and one on interleaving. And I think that's really important, because when I hear people talk about spacing and interleaving, I hear them say spacing and interleaving, and it's almost like it's one term, one reference point, because I'm not sure that many people actually understand the difference between spacing and interleaving. And yes, they are connected, and yes, that when you interleave effectively, you add spacing into there as well. But they are very, very separate things, and you can do them separately. And that's why I've written 2 separate chapters on them. So let's really break that down first. So spacing is when you, going back to retrieval practice, I suppose, really. I think retrieval practice is something that has come through more than anything in terms of the science of learning in our classrooms at the moment. Most people are really familiar with that now, and it's really hitting the ground, which is great. And spacing is where you need to leave some time really for students to forget the information, for them to be able to retrieve it. And it's really important, because when we retrieve information, the reason that it sticks and the reason that actually we remember information by that recall is that our brains have to do something with it. So if we've just taught something and it's in students' short-term memory, they haven't had time to forget it, it's too familiar, it's in their short-term memory. So when you're asking them to do something with it, it's too easy. So we need to give that time to forget it. So we might need to give a lesson, 2 lessons, even maybe 2 or 3 weeks in between giving that input in terms of the information, and then asking them to do something with it. And that's the key point, having to do something with that information. If we're just asked to regurgitate something and it's too familiar, then our brains aren't working that hard, and therefore we don't really make those long-term memory traces. So the spacing is really key to do that. Where interleaving is different is where we actually start to mix topics together, and we compare and contrast between different skills or different themes or different bits of content. And what that allows us to do is really get under the fine detail of what makes those things different. And we also need to then look at what different solutions do we need to use to be able to, to combat those problems. So if I give you an example of that in a maths lesson, if we're just giving kids addition questions all lesson, or questions about angles on a straight line, then the students know what's coming. They're in that comfort zone. They've already got their mind focused on the solution. How do I need to attack it? What do I need to do? And they're just doing one after the other. Suddenly, when you start to interleave things together and you drop a multiplication question in, or you drop opposite angles in, you then have to actually really read the question, because you don't know what's coming next. And that's what life's like. Life isn't all blocked in easy content together. And I think that's what Teacher 1.0 has done. That's what I talk about in here. Teacher 1.0, and we've all probably done it because we've been taught like this ourselves. We've been taught in blocks. All right, we have been, because it sounds eminently sensible. Why would we want to mix things up and make it harder for people? Let's just teach one block and then let's test it straight away. Then let's teach the next block and then let's test that. That's what we've done for years and years and years. But the research is saying that that's too easy. We need to then kind of interleave things together so that students can actually see the differences. And the big research trial in the book talks about where there was a study where a group of students were given one artist at a time to study in terms of paintings. So one group had looked at one artist at a time, what paintings they painted, how they painted them, the style of them, and they really mastered that artist altogether before they moved on to study the next artist and their different style of paintings. The second group interleaved all the time. So they kept seeing different artists or different paintings by different artists, comparing and contrasting another one. And everyone, when they did the initial kind of the kind of theory behind it, all thought that surely the group that mastered one artist at a time before they moved on, surely when they did some testing at the end of it, they were going to be far better in terms of their retention, their knowledge, their understanding, because they mastered that artist. And actually, the results turned out that the second group, the ones that interleaved in between each artist and each painting, performed way better than the first group. And that's because they were able to really compare and contrast the details and really what made that painting by that artist rather than by that one, and the slight differences in details. And they really understood it at a far deeper level. And I think that's really key for us to think about that and how we can then use that in our classrooms. And if I give an example in a sporting sense, if we were going to be teaching somebody how to play tennis and you were teaching them how to play backhand, they'd be hitting backhands, they'd be stood side on, they'd have the grip correctly, they'd be hitting backhands, they'd be still stood here, they'd wait for the next ball to come, their feet would be in the right position, they'd hit the next backhand, they'd wait for the next one. It becomes too easy. Suddenly, when we stand and say, right, the ball is now going to come anywhere, it might be a backhand, it might be a forehand, it might be a volley. Suddenly, you've then got to identify the pace, the bounce, the height of the bounce, where it's going to land, the direction, and you've then got to really make sure and make that actual that shot selection correctly, because you have to actually identify, compare and contrast, and solve it at in-game pace. And that's where you can really, really make those massive advances. However, with interleaving, we need to make sure that the students are at a certain level before we can do that, because if we introduce interleaving too quickly, it becomes too difficult. And if you think about that tennis example, if you were just picking up a racket to start with and you stood there and said the ball can come anywhere, then the chances are every time you hit the ball, it's going to hit the back net. They're not going to be able to actually make that shot. So what we need to do is make sure that they can do all the skills to a certain degree, then introduce the interleaving so it becomes more difficult, because they can actually play the backhand, they can play the forehand, they can come in and play the volley, and therefore we can then make sure that is at the right level and the right level of desirable difficulty. So that's really key when we think about spacing and interleaving, and that's why they're different. So naturally, when you introduce interleaving, you introduce spacing, because you are mixing and matching and leaving a bit of gap between them, but they are actually different. And when we talk about in the book here, when you isolate it down just to interleaving, that has a real impact on top of just the normal spacing. So it's really important to understand that. Next thing I want to do, I wanted to talk about questioning. And questioning has been talked about a lot of times in lots of different books. But I think it's really important for us more than ever now, because of our approach back to lessons when we go back to school. We are going to be in a position where, certainly in the UK here, we are going to be told to teach from the front, to not be too close to our students. So it's forcing us into teaching from the front. And we're not going to be able to be used to or doing what we used to do in terms of wandering around the classroom, checking if everyone's okay, looking at books, checking for understanding. We're going to need to do that all from the front. And I think what it's going to do, it's really going to force us into some great teaching habits and some great questioning habits, because what we need to make sure we're doing is we need to make sure that we have a real no hands up questioning approach. And I talk about this in the book, about really engaging people into deep thought. So if we are making sure we've got no hands up, and we are making sure we choose who answers the questions, then we are controlling really the fact that everyone's going to be engaged throughout that lesson. We can't walk around and we can't make sure people are engaged. We've got to be at the front. So we need to do these things slightly differently. And I also talk about whole class response systems. So lots of different ways you can do whole class response systems. We can have mini whiteboards with our answers on, which we kind of hold up. We can have things like, if we have multiple choice questioning, we have A, B, and C. You can have 1, 2, and 3, which people can be showing you their answers for. We can have kind of confident, not really sure, unconfident. So we can do all these things without having to walk around the classroom. I think that's going to be really, really key for us this September. One thing I talked about there was kind of multiple choice questions, and that's something that it was interesting that when I was doing my real learning, I suppose, over the last 2 or 3 years about the science of learning, that I really had a kind of light bulb moment about multiple choice questions. And I used to think that they were, suppose, lazy teaching, that people could just guess the answers. But when I really started to learn about it and learn that actually, if you've got, if you really thought about your answers and you haven't just put one correct one and then 3 kind of throwaway wrong answers, if you've put in there key misconceptions that some of your students have every year, and as an experienced teacher, the things that people struggle with, then not only are you going to work out what the students have got it correct, you're also going to understand why students have got it wrong. And that's really important, because it's not just about which students have got it wrong or how many students have got it wrong. If you only find out that students have got it wrong and you don't know why they've got it wrong, you'll never be able to correct their errors. And unfortunately, if you carry a deep-seated misconception, you will always get that question wrong until the day you die, because you have a belief that the way you answer that question is by doing this. And in terms of a misconception, if I go back to the maths example of angles on a straight line, we know that they add up to 180 degrees. If you have a misconception that they add up to 360 degrees, every single question that you answer on angles on a straight line, you will get wrong to the day you die, because you're adding it up to 360. And as a teacher, if you're not aware of that, and if you haven't done any multiple choice questioning to work out how that is, and you then start to put an answer in that adds up to 360, all those hands that go up to say, I think it's answer 1, you then know there's a misconception there that you need to actually change. That's really important. And I think a lot of people really don't think enough about that, and about how they construct their questions and how they construct it to actually find out about the misconceptions or mistakes, because they're 2 very, very different things. I want to quickly go on to cognitive load now. And I think it's another, going back to school, it's another thing that we really need to look at. And again, it's another chapter here in my book where I talk about cognitive load. Cognitive load has been talked about quite a lot recently. And unfortunately, we've all been in the position, I suppose, of trying to make our presentations on our whiteboards as fancy as possible. And this is only added to the cognitive load that our students have been really feeling and seeing in our classes every day. What cognitive load is that we have a certain amount of working memory that we can use to process things with. And that working memory is taken up, or percentages of that are taken up by lots of other things and lots of distractions. And PowerPoint has a lot to, and interactive whiteboards have a lot to answer for with this. And if a prime example is that you've got students looking at your whiteboard, and you've got lots of text all over the place, or you've got lots of images, you've got lots of different colors, you might even have things flashing in the corner, and it's just so difficult to be able to concentrate on what's going on, because we've got literally everything going on, and everything's competing for the attention of that student, and then you're trying to get them to think really hard about something, and all this is going on. And you imagine if I was trying to talk to you about something really, really difficult, but I just kept doing this in the corner as you were trying to concentrate. That's what's happening in lots of our classrooms. The PowerPoint displays, we've gone far too far away from what used to be, I suppose, on normal acetates, if anyone's old enough to remember that. We've suddenly thought, wow, I can do this, I can do that. I've got this happening, I've got transitions left, right, and center. And everything's just competing for your students' attention. And one thing I'd say to that is, when was the last time you sat in the back of your classroom and looked forward and looked at your whiteboard and looked at what's around and what's also competing for the attention of your students? And that might be something interesting to do, to think about, actually, have I looked at my presentation from the back of the room? What else? What other posters and other things have I got going on around my whiteboard that I might want to actually strip back and go for a more minimalist approach, so I can hold their attention better? One of the big crimes that we do, and I talk about this in the Teacher 1.0 section here, is when we put text on the screen and then we read that text back to students. And what's really interesting here is that as soon as you put text on the screen, you're almost telling students to read it, because it goes on the screen. That's what we do. And think about it when you're at conferences, you're in presentations. When something's put on the screen, you start to read it. What happens though is, as a teacher, when you start to read it, your voice will be slightly out of sync with the voice in the student's head. Now, the voice in the student's head is reading that back as they're saying it. Then you start about 4 or 5 words later, and suddenly it's almost like having, 2 bits of audio in your house that are just out of sync with each other. It's like, oh, I can't concentrate. This isn't working. Yet we do that all the time. So we need to really, if we're going to put some text on, we need to put it on and we need to leave it for a few seconds and let the students read it. And then we can then summarize it or pull out the key points. If you start reading it straight away, all right, those 2 voices are out of sync and it doesn't work. And it creates, significant intrinsic cognitive load, which really, intrinsic and extraneous, because the intrinsic cognitive load is how difficult something is for us to understand. So the text might be quite difficult to start with, but then you've added that extraneous cognitive load because you started talking over the top and you're out of sync. So you're causing that distraction. So it then becomes very, very difficult for the students to be able to process that. And all of their working memory suddenly gets kind of caught up in what you're doing unintentionally. So it's really important to think about that. And, again, going back to our schools, going back to how we're going to check in for understanding and how we're going to be really use the clarity of our understanding and clarity of our kind of descriptions and instructions. We need to be thinking really carefully about that. Okay, I want to move on now to how you can really put this into practice in your school, because it's really important that not only do you understand it from a teaching point of view, but actually your whole school community need to understand this. This isn't just about, let's empower the teachers. That's the first point, granted. We need to know about this. We need to know about the research. We need to know what works, and we need to be able to put it into practice in our classroom. But there's 2 other key stakeholders in this that really need to understand this. The first are the students. Okay, students need to understand this, and they clearly don't need to understand it to the nth degree like you do, but they need to understand why you're doing something, because lots of the things we're going to talk about make things more difficult for them. So spacing and interleaving, it makes it more difficult, but it's a desirable difficulty. And that's a really key term that I talk about a lot in the book, desirable difficulties. And that comes from Professor Robert Bjork, who talks about if it's not hard enough, then it's not going to work. If it's too hard, then it's not going to work. It's that level of desirable difficulty, and if you think about, if I go back to another sport analogy, people, swimmers train with weights on their legs because it's a desirable difficulty, okay? So that when they're in competition, it feels a lot easier. So as educators, we need to make sure we get the right level of difficulty and intensity for our students. So that means not teaching things in one block and then testing straight away. It's too easy. What it means is, how can we then actually create some spacing and some gaps so it becomes a bit more difficult, because they have to forget something to then actually retrieve it later on. And again, that makes it more difficult, but actually it's the right level of difficulty. And we need to tell students that although blocking, when we actually teach something in one block and then test it straight away, although that will initially create higher levels of performance initially at that point, it won't create higher levels of retention and knowledge retention and real deep learning in the long term. And that's really interesting, because we need to really sell that message to students, because students will always favor short-term performance over long-term games. All right, they won't want to get their confidence. They want to do a test straight away and get a great result and think, I've learned that. But then when they don't do anything with it for another 6 months and we come to the end of the year, we all know how difficult it is for them to remember that. So we need to be talking to them about the science of learning, how it's important, how it works, and why we are putting these desirable levels of difficulty into our instruction, into our teaching, that will actually make them better students. They'll be able to retain more information, and they'll be able to really use that better along the way. So that's the first people we need to talk about. The second are our parents. They need to understand this too. We need to educate our parents on how they can help at home, the different strategies that they can do in terms of the low stakes quizzing and testing and retrieval, how they can help at home. Because if we're not adding any value at home, and all of our learning is between 9 and 3 o'clock and nothing happens at home, we're missing a trick. So we really need to make sure that we that we've got that, and we talk about all the stakeholders, and we make that work in our schools. Okay, if you want to, and you haven't grabbed a copy of my book, you can get one from direct from Bloomsbury, or wherever else you get your books from. Or lots of you kind of get them from Amazon and that kind of stuff. But right now, you can get this for 25% off. And Bloomsbury Education have done. I'm going to give it out now. A 25% off code. And if you use the code Rebooted25, So that's Rebooted 25. And I'm sure someone from Bloomsbury will put this in the chat in a second. So Rebooted 25. If you use that at bloomsbury.com, and that's valid all the way until the end of the month, until the end of August. So you've got another week to get it at that discounted price. Then you can get it for 25% off. So hopefully, if you haven't grabbed a copy yet, then you can get this and you can get it for 25% off. Who doesn't like a deal? All right. So, please do that. Please grab a copy. And if you are going to grab a copy or you have got it already, again, what can you do as a teacher, a middle leader, a senior leader to actually spread this information and spread this knowledge of the science learning into your school, into your professional development sessions? And the way I've done this and the way I've made sure that there are very simple, easy to use strategy in here. You can pick them, you can put them into your professional development sessions if you're a senior leader. You can put them into your classroom straight away. And again, you're not having to really digest hundreds and hundreds of pages and decipher real high-level academic language to understand what to do. I've done that for you. It's in this book and it's all ready to go. Okay, I'm going to answer a few questions now, if there is any in the chat. I asked people to put in the chat where they were watching from. I can see quite a few people are in here from Kent. John Wise, my good friend from Southampton. Dave West from Yorkshire, it's great. Lots of people in there. James from Worcestershire, fantastic. So if you've got any questions, if you put them in the chat or if you put them in the in Twitter and use the hashtag Teaching Rebooted, and I'll see if there's any questions in here for me to answer now. If you have got any, Tom Sales just joined live from Dubai. So we've gone global tonight, which is fantastic. If you've got any questions about how you can use the science of learning in your classroom. Okay, we've got a question here that's coming via email. How do teachers keep up with the research? That's a really good point, because actually, as a senior leader, as a senior leader in charge of teaching and learning, I've always made sure that I've tried to keep in touch with the latest research, and then try and make sure that I'm almost a triage for that research, because it's no good sending a lot of research out to all your teachers and expecting to read it and to understand it. I think it's your job as a senior leader to really do that, to find out what it means, to splice it up, to chunk it, and to put it out in your sessions or in some kind of bulletin or format where people can actually do something with it. If you're a teacher and you are not a senior leader that's really doesn't have that influence across the whole school, then it's about keeping in touch with what's happening. I think Twitter and LinkedIn are really great sources for that. There's great things like the Chartered College of Teaching journal, which has different academic journal style articles in every month that talk through lots of these things. But again, some of it can actually be quite demanding, in terms of a cognitive load, I suppose, to read it. And I sometimes read that and have to read it once or twice or three times. And what have I read there? There's some big words in there. So it's about finding it wherever you can find it. Lots of great books on the market, written by teachers like this at the moment, and really keeping abreast of everything that's going on, so that you can really make sure that you have that great foundation underneath you to use what works in your classroom, and not just maybe what you think what works or what you thought worked from your teacher training. Okay, what do I think about the value of working walls? This is from Mr. Trag. In my school we don't have any working walls. I'm not familiar with that term. If you can just put in the chat what that term really means. I'm not sure. I'll come back to you in a second. If you can just put a bit more information about what you mean by a working wall, that'd be great. David West, to what level of teacher would you introduce the book? Right, this is everything from a trainee teacher up to a senior leader. I've really made it really easy to understand. So if I go into this chapter here, feedback, you've got teacher 1.0. So what are we used to do in feedback? And the things that we've done that we shouldn't have done. Then we go into the research, we break it all down. And then teacher 2.0, there are 4 different ways to do it. So really simple, anyone can access it. So right from trainee teacher all the way through to senior leader, and there's something in there for everyone. Tom in Dubai, within my book, which chapter would you feel is better aimed at teachers in the primary phase? Interesting that, Tom, because I've tried to make sure that everything I've done in here is phase generic. I haven't talked about anything really in secondary school, which is my specialism. Whether it's retrieval practice or spacing out or the interleaving of content or how we give feedback, or how we question students, I've really made sure that everything in there it's about really how we learn as human beings. And I suppose that would go right the way through to university level and to adult learning. So there isn't really a cap on which one is best for which phase, because I've really tried to make sure when I was writing it, that thinking about the audience, that it was really phase generic, and it was about learning and not necessarily about a phase of learning. So hopefully there should be something in there in every chapter, that would work right the way through from primary all the way through to secondary, FE, higher education, and adult education as well. Cliff Fernandez, how do I buy a signed copy of my book? Well, I'm sure Bloomsbury can, if you contact Bloomsbury and if you drop them an email, I'm sure we'll be able to work something out, and I'm sure that I'll be able to kind of get one, sign one for them, and you'll be able to get it that way, I'm sure. So if you drop them, either tweet them, send them an email, or even if I know Clemmy is doing some chat on here tonight, who works at Bloomsbury in the education team. I'm sure if you speak to her or you tweet them or you send her a private message, we can work something out and we can get one to you, no problem at all. Right, Matthew again, working walls, displays, stuck-up posters, laminated sheets. Right, Matthew, that's really interesting. And thanks for getting back to me and clarifying what you meant there. What's really interesting is that I think for years and years, we have wanted as classroom teachers to decorate our walls with as much information as we can to help our students. And at the moment, I'm not really sure where I sit on this, because what I heard a few years ago really struck a chord with me, that if we're doing in-class tests, or we're doing some kind of assessment in class, and we've got all this information plastered all over our walls, you can see students looking up, looking at things and writing things down. So it becomes, we are positively influencing the performance on their test, for that reason. So somebody said to me, actually, maybe we should start to take those things down, because it becomes too much of a crux and a crutch, should I say, for our students, that they're looking up and then you can see them looking around. But then somebody said to me just a few months ago, yes, but that really helps sometimes when they're in the exam, actually visualizing. You can see sometimes students looking up, and even though there's nothing there because they're in an exam hall, they're looking at where that would be in a classroom and visualizing what's there, and it helps them to remember what's on that wall. So I suppose I'm on the fence for that. I'm not really sure. I know I've blogged before, and going back to this idea of Teacher 1.0, I was a massive kind of advocate of walls for learning and not just walls for wallpaper. But then more and more I'm thinking about it now, is it just wallpaper? Is it too much cognitive load because there's things going all over the place? But equally, if it was just a bare room and there was nothing on the walls, would it feel a bit too clinical? So again, I don't have all the answers on this, and that's why I really wanted to talk about Teacher 1.0, because we're all Teacher 1.0 at some point in our career and at some point in our expertise. So I need to do some more learning on that, I suppose. But it's a very interesting concept for us just to, a perfect example of us to stop and reflect of the things that we've always done and always thought are right, and just take a stop and go, is it actually right? And it might be that it is right and you continue with it, but at least you've stopped, you've thought, you've considered the research, and then you've made a sound decision based on what it is. That's a great example. So sorry I couldn't give you a definitive answer there, but it's something I need to keep thinking about as well, which I think is where we all are. Right, what have we got there? What's my favorite tip from the book? Cliff says. I'll pick one out. My favorite tip. Let's have a look. One of the things I'll pick out, it's because I've just opened it actually, is increasing wait time in our questions. Okay, and this is in the questioning section. And then one of the things I knew about wait time, and I knew that the average teacher leaves less than 1 second wait time between asking a question and wanting a response. And that's downright crazy. But we've all done it, and I've done it so many times. You ask a question, the reason you ask a question is you want an answer, so you get an answer back. And it's literally the first thing that's coming out of a student's mind. It's like me saying to you, here's a question. Tell me what you think you're in your head right now. We're not going to be able to give a great answer. So increasing the wait time and actually directing that and saying, I don't want an answer for 5, 6, 7 seconds, and I'll pick who answers it. It increases the quality of response. It increases how articulate the response is from the student, because they've had time to think about it. It increases their thought process. And also, the other thing that I really like about this, because I'd known about that wait time before, but when I started researching it for the book, what I also hadn't realized is the wait time that you give yourself between getting the response from the student and yourself making a response to that response. Because quite often when a student says something, we dive straight in and go, yeah, that's great. Yeah, you kind of meant this, 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 and this. And we almost reframe their answer for them. So actually it's for us to also take that wait time. So it's, I'm going to pose a question. I'm going to give 4 or 5 seconds wait time. I'm going to ask for a response. I'm going to get that response. And then I'm going to wait 3 or 4 seconds for me to process what they've said, to be able to then make a really intelligent move forward in my classroom or response to that response, rather than just kind of talking over the top of them and going, yeah, yeah, great, great, great. So I think that's something really key that we can just do with no different resources, just about our commitment to how we're going to be talking about that and how we're going to use our really high level questioning, not just the question that comes out of our mouth without any thought, but really high level questioning. And we can do that literally tomorrow in our classrooms. Okay. Right, James is talking about working walls, very powerful tool, but you've got to watch overstimulated effect, especially with SEN students. Tom is saying, which method have I used that has the biggest impact in my classroom in terms of pupil progress and attainment? That's got to be, for me, retrieval practice. Every lesson, some form of retrieval, getting students to remember and do something with information, because the research says every single time students get to retrieve information and they do something with it from previous information, it makes that memory trace stronger every time. And if I give you an example, think about when you used to, again, I'm assuming people are of an age where they used to have and answer a landline in their house, okay? So think about when you used to answer your landline at home, and I was trained as a child to answer the phone by my mum and dad by saying the number. So I used to say 01325 305 215, and I used to answer the phone like that all the time. So every single time I was retrieving that phone number from my memory. So I still remember that number right now from my first phone number. And you probably remember your first phone number because you were retrieving it all the time. So the more we can get students to retrieve information, the stronger it makes the memory trace, the better it becomes. And the longer we can then leave that spacing for them to forget information before we retrieve it again. A bit like going to the gym. The more we go, the longer we can kind of leave in between, we have to go again. So that's made the biggest difference in the classroom, not just in my classroom, but in the schools that I've worked in, to really drive forward attainment. Okay, David has said, can I envisage a workshop including teachers with a range of teaching experience? Could a workshop benefit all, or would it leave sections of the audience behind? I think everyone at some point in here is at Teacher 1.0, David, and I think that what I've tried to do is really write Teacher 1.0 for people to actually connect with and go, yeah, I've done that, or I still do that, or I remember doing that, or wow, I did that for so long, and that was really a bit of a waste of time. So hopefully any workshop on any one of these topics, you will be able to really gather everyone, because everyone is in that similar vein. And I haven't seen, unfortunately, many people coming through from teacher training right now with a huge understanding of all those areas of science and learning. So I think whether it's experienced teachers, whether it's new teachers, I think you'll certainly be able to, to find a common ground there of people that actually can move forward together. Yeah, David has been recorded, so I think you'll be able to find it again on YouTube. I think what happens with the YouTube live is it automatically posts it back to my thread afterwards, so you'll certainly be able to see that. It'll be added to my channel. So yeah, they're all the questions that have come into life. If you've got another question, please feel free to fire it in there now. Remember, if you haven't picked up a copy of this, you can get it for 25% off all the way until the end of August by using the code Rebooted 25, and someone's put it in the chat earlier, Rebooted 25, and if you go to bloomsbury.com, you can get that, and you'll be able to get that really quick, and it'll be in time for you. If you are in the UK, hopefully you'll be able to get that really quick in time for you to digest it, because like I say, it is fairly easy to digest, and that's why I wanted to write it in this way, so you didn't have to spend months digesting it. Get it, digest it, make those impacts and inroads in your classroom, and then go to another chapter, try that, talk to other people about it, and it's great. And then certainly if you are a school leader and you want to buy a kind of a bulk order for, I know people are asking me whether they can buy bulk orders for their staff libraries or their CPD programs. I'm sure if you contact Bloomsbury, they will be able to look at some kind of a discount if you're buying, a large amount of items in there. Okay, so if there aren't any other questions, hang on, I've got another one here. I spoke about stopping asking the right question using research. How do I think COVID-19 will change classroom practice? Okay, like I mentioned before, I think it's going to be really interesting, because if, like the schools that I work in now, you have to stand at the front and you're not allowed really to kind of walk around and kind of mingle between students, then it is going to force us into some really what I'm calling great teaching habits, because you are going to have to really think about your clarity of explanations. You are going to have to think about your questioning and your checking for understanding. How are you going to check if students have understood if you're not able to kind of do what you normally do and walk around the room? So you're going to have to use whole class response systems. You're going to have to use, whether it's a one of those, or a 1, 2, 3, or a yes, or a mini whiteboard. It's going to force it a different habit, because we aren't able to do the things we normally used to do. I always like to teach from different parts of the classroom, so I like to walk the whole room and teach from the back corners and in the middle at the back, and I like to have students almost listening to my voice sometimes without seeing me, so they're really having to tune into me. But again, I can't do that because I'm going to be at the front of the classroom. So lots of different ways that we're going to have to think about this as teachers. And I really think that if you haven't already done so already, you can't just think about going back to school and going into autopilot mode and thinking, I've done this for years, it's going to be fine, I'm going to crack back on. This is different. This is a different ball game in September. And you really have to think about your classroom craft, how you can command your classroom from the front, what you need to do, how you need to change things, how you need to change your style of presentation and questioning and checking for understanding. Because, and also, if your school isn't allowing you to take any books home to mark, how are you going to give any feedback? So we're going to have to be forced down a route of whole class feedback. How are you going to be able to actually ascertain whether students have mistakes or misconceptions? Lots of different ways, but this is going to take a lot of thought, a lot of experience, a lot of real time, and real kind of thought about your classroom craft and your pedagogy, how to get this right. You can't just turn up and expect to do what you've already done, because you'll find very quickly that that's not working anymore. So yeah, really thinking about how that changes in September. And I would urge you to be thinking about that right now in the run up to September. If you are in a UK school and we go back in September, if you're in a Scottish school, you've probably already started. You might be already thinking, wow, this was really interesting. I wasn't really, I didn't really appreciate how difficult it was going to be. So yeah, definitely need to think about that as we move forward. Okay, I think that's all the questions. So thank you all for joining tonight. If you want to connect with me, if you haven't already connected with me, you can find me on LinkedIn at Jon Tait. You can find me on Twitter at Team Tait. Obviously my YouTube channel here, which you've already found. You can find me on Facebook. I have a Facebook page called Edutate. And please reach out to me and connect with me if you've got any more questions afterwards. Just use the hashtag Teaching Rebooted if you're on Twitter. I'll find it, or tweet me, at Team Tait. Send me a message on LinkedIn. I've posted for the last 2 or 3 days about this session, so you'll be able to find one of those posts and comment on it. I'll get back to you if you've got a question that hasn't been answered tonight. James just saying there, yeah, gosh, hadn't really thought of the implication of go back in September. Yeah, absolutely, Jay. It is. It's going to be very different. And again, I don't know what your school's like, but I know that I've just taken up a role as a deputy CEO at a multi-academy trust, and certainly one of the schools that I've been in last week, we're putting some kind of tape on the floor, almost like if you're a football fan, like a technical area, and that's the best way I can. If you're a football fan, you've got a technical area like a manager. You ain't allowed out of it. That's your area. Kids aren't going to come into it. You're going to teach from there. So it's about thinking how. All the things that I used to do, I can't now do. So yeah, it's a very different ball game, and getting your head around that pretty quickly, is going to be essential. Really, if you want to be really effective, and you want to hit the ground running. Okay, I think that's it. Thanks for that, Tom, and hopefully the sun's shining in Dubai out there, and hopefully I know you've ordered it from Bloomsbury and it's on its way. So hopefully it'll be shipped out to you, or flown out to you pretty soon. Yeah, thank you very much for everyone's support tonight. Remember to use the code Rebooted 25 at bloomsbury.com, and they'll get you that out pretty quickly with a great discount. And you can connect with me all on my social media platforms. So thank you very much for that. If you've got any more questions, hit me up on any of my social media channels. And yeah, whatever you're doing tonight, good night, good luck for the new term, and just really think about what you're going to be doing, because it is going to be a different ballgame. Thank you.